talk about noisy jobs and how those noisy jobs and even our recreation and other activities in our life can affect our hearing. Hearing is such an important part of our lives that the loss of this sense can really impact our relationships with others, impact our ability to do our jobs, and really our overall enjoyment of life. And so we want to protect this essential sense. You know, hearing, you can get along without your sense of hearing, but it's very difficult. Listening to an ad on the radio the other day, and they talk about how if we lose our hearing, we're more likely to have some ages due to old, or some illnesses due to old age, like dementia and other things like that. It helps. Hearing is essential for our cognitive abilities. So hearing is this essential sense, and it's so easy to lose. I went out to dinner with a friend of mine, his wife. He's an audiologist. We went out Friday night, and we're in a restaurant, and I realized, wow, this is a noisy restaurant, and I may have lost enough of my hearing that it's really tough. We had a hard time communicating, and it gives you that feel of isolation. Costs a lot of money, and it affects our relationships. It's a big problem. Over 30 million people are exposed regularly to high noise levels and have the potential to lose their hearing. There are more people that are subject to this, that have hearing loss, than have diabetes. That's a huge impact on our society. And one trend that we're seeing, and this friend of mine who's an audiologist concurred with this, he's seeing a lot more people at a younger age coming in with hearing issues. And we ask ourselves, why is that? How come we have more hearing issues at a younger age? And so we're going to go to our first quiz here. So this is for bragging rights. Who can name in your chat box who this singer is? Brent and Doug, you can't do it this time unless nobody can figure it out. What's the name of this singer, and what band did he sing for? So while you're coming up with that, nobody said it yet. Oh, there we go. Esther Davis said it's Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. All right, rock on, Esther. That's pretty good. It's pretty quick. One of the major issues with people having hearing loss at a younger age involves media. As you look around, and this is kind of a scary trend that I see, people are wearing earbuds everywhere, whether they're driving, whether they're whatever part of their life. My kids are included in that. And if we have that noise turned up too loud, it can have an effect on our hearing. And that's really what we're seeing as a generation. We're compounding our hearing problems by adding that noise through our headphones. Okay, so one of the main focuses of this training today is to ask each of you to look at your exposures. Where am I exposed to high levels of noise? Now, Brent here is our local rocker. He's like, oh no, he's going to talk about me again. And probably one of his major hearing exposures is listening to Megadeth as he's driving up and down the freeways to this state. Is it Megadeth on the way to Vernal, or what's the band for driving?
Could be
to
some
Vernal?
Iron Maiden later, maybe.
Iron Maiden, yeah. Over the hills and far. No, not that.
Run to the Hills.
Run to the Hills. That's it. All right. That would be a good one for that ride. So probably one of those big exposures that Brent has would come from that. It may not be a work-related thing where he's running a jackhammer. So let's look at our exposures and see what might affect us. All right, so there are many noisy jobs out there. You might be in the fire service or law enforcement and deal with sirens and firearms. You might be in public works and deal with jackhammers and compressed air and crushers and compactors and generators and all of these noisy pieces of equipment that can slowly but surely have effect on our hearing. The problem with this noise exposure is it's permanent. This damage doesn't go away. So if you take a look at this picture, it shows a cross section of our ears and our system to be able to take information, take really vibrations in the air, sound, and turn that into something that our brain can understand. Our ears funnel these noise impulses into our eardrum or our tympanic membrane, and that transfers the sound through a whole group of different organs within our ear to the inner ear. Inside of our inner ear, there are hair cells. Let me switch to this next slide. If you look here on the left-hand side of the screen, these kind of red, this is an electron micrograph, electron microscope, very, very high level of amplification. These are hair cells. That's a single cell. And what that cell does is, as these noise impulses are transferred into our brain, they vibrate. And as these hair cells vibrate, they cause this impulse to become a nerve impulse. And it sends that through our auditory nerve to our brain. And then our brain calculates and analyzes this information and says, oh, that's somebody talking, or this is music, or this is random noise. It's really quite an amazing system to provide that information to us. Problem with how this works, or these hair cells can become damaged from noise exposure. If you look at the right-hand side of the screen, some of these hair cells have had significant damage done to them from noise exposure. And once they've been damaged, it's done. That damage is permanent, and they won't regenerate or regrow, and so we have to deal with that. So that's why protecting our hearing is so important. All right. So how do we go about protecting our hearing? Number one, knowledge is power. We need to know what our exposures are and how much exposure we're receiving on a day-to-day basis. How much is that? Well, you know, there are some really simple ways to determine what that is. Here's an application that I downloaded for free. It's called SPL Meter. And it does a pretty darn good job of giving me an indication of what my noise exposures are. This is not something that OSHA can give you a citation for, or that you can show to OSHA and tell them, hey, we're okay. But for a general evaluation of what our exposures are, this does a great job, and it doesn't cost me any money. As long as I've got a smartphone, I can see what it is. You can see, probably can't see very well on this camera, but as I speak, the louder I speak, the higher the exposure is. They're pretty darn accurate, actually. Check these against a calibrated noise dosimeter, and it's pretty darn good. And this is on an iPhone. I'm sure every device will be a little bit different, but it gives me a good indication of what my exposure level is. Okay, so that's an easy way to do it. What was the name of that app? It is, oh, Jim, I'm glad you were able to log in. It's called SPL Meter. There are a whole bunch of them out there. A lot of them will charge you for the app, but just the letters SPL, sound pressure levels, what that stands for. But SPL Meter is the app. A whole bunch of other applications out there that do the same thing. And that gives us a quick indication. One other way, just a really simple way, is can I carry on a good conversation without having to raise my voice or shout to somebody else? As my friends and my wife and I were out to dinner at Texas Roadhouse the other night. We were sitting there, and we had a hard time communicating in that environment. Love Texas Roadhouse, but it's really loud, and it made it difficult to communicate. I should have turned on my SPL meter to see how loud it was. I'm sure it was above 85 decibels. That's kind of an indication at the point I have to raise my voice to really have a good conversation back and forth, or it's labored. That's about 85 decibels. Okay. All right. So we ask ourselves, how loud is too loud? 85 decibels is the OSHA action level for noise exposure. 90 is the PEL, or permissible exposure limit. That's the level at which you can be cited as an employer if you are overexposing your employees. Okay, so at 85 decibels at the action level, we have to put people into a hearing conservation program. Now that's not just I'm exposed to 85 decibels for a second. That's 85 decibels for an 8-hour shift. So let's go to this next slide. 8-hour shift is at 85 decibels is 50% of the dose. 100% of dose, which is the PEL, that's 4 hours at 90 decibels. And as you look at this chart here, for every 5 decibels of increase, we half the amount of time. It actually doubles the sound pressure or the exposure that we have every 5 decibel increase. That's because decibels are not a linear measurement, they're logarithmic. And so as we go from 85 to 90, we're actually doubling our exposure. And as you look at this, 85 decibels for 8 hours is equivalent to 5 minutes at 120 decibels. So the higher that exposure is, the shorter amount of time that we can be there without having injury to our hearing. Okay, so I remember years ago, and I haven't seen these in sports arenas, I think they've taken them out. They used to put a decibel meter in at arenas, and so you could see how loud the crowd really was. And I remember seeing 120 decibels on those meters, and I thought, wow, this is pretty bad for people's hearing to be just existing inside of this arena. Well, think about that as we do our recreational activities. What are we exposing ourselves to? What are we dealing with in work-related things? All right, so here's just some examples here. Normal conversation, we're about 60 to 70 decibels. Up to, threshold of pain is about 125 decibels, where you just instinctively put your hands over your ears because it hurts. But think about things like your lawnmower. Power motor can be over 100 decibels. How much time can we be exposed? Well, not very much without proper hearing protection. A rifle shot, many of us out there like to go shooting as a recreation activity, or it might be part of our job. We're in law enforcement and we have to go out and practice and qualify. Well, 163 decibels is equivalent to a rifle shot. That's some serious exposure to our ears. Just along those lines, one of the interesting things that you'll find is one ear can be affected more than others. So I'm right-handed, and if I shoot, which ear is going to take the brunt of that muzzle blast? What is it, Doug?
The left one?
The left ear. So as you go out, as you get an audiogram, if you see an audiologist, that person will ask you, are you right-handed or left-handed? And look at your hobbies. If you're a shooter, and you're right-handed, it's going to be your left ear that will probably have a noticeable diminished threshold shift or diminished hearing. Okay. All right. So recreational exposures. If you're a metalhead and you go to rock concerts, we're at 120 decibels. Remember back in the day, being a teenager, going to concerts, the next day wandering around not being able to hear. So, all right. So, how do we handle this? If we're exposed at the action level, 85 decibels for an 8-hour shift, then we're required under OSHA to implement a hearing conservation program. And what does that mean? That means that we monitor noise exposures, and we have some data that we've done on this. We've gone out to fire stations and a few different things with our equipment and done some testing there to get some background. But at minimum, we should go out with an application and get an idea. Are we anywhere near 85 decibels for an 8-hour shift? If we are, we should probably look closer. Requires us to put in engineering and administrative controls. We'll talk about that a little more in a minute. Audiometric evaluation. At 85 decibels or above, employees should go in and have their hearing checked. A baseline and then an annual audiogram that checks really what your progress is if we're having any significant shifts in our hearing. Also requires the use of, or providing, and at 90 decibels requires the use of hearing protectors, plugs or muffs, or a combination of those. Also requires education, just like we're doing now, provides some information about how to protect your hearing, and then a couple of program evaluation, record keeping type things. Administrative controls. Under OSHA, we're required to evaluate the effectiveness of administrative controls. And on these, a lot of times the controls are built into place. We may defeat those. I remember being a kid and having a dirt bike, and the first thing that you did if you were a cool kid was you took the baffle out of the muffler on the dirt bike so it would be noisier. We wanted the noisiest bike in the area. Let's not defeat those engineering controls that are in place. Looking at providing some sort of controls. It might be that we direct the noise out of the area. If we have a vacuum pump that has a muffler on it, can we direct that outside of the building or away from where people are? That's what a control would be. Limiting exposure. Well, if we've got a really noisy engine room, let's not put a desk in there for people to do their work, because that's going to force them to be exposed. Okay. All right. Hearing protectors are one of the simplest, easiest ways to protect our hearing, and unfortunately, people will bypass this and just not take the time to have these and use them correctly. So number one thing is to have those with you. Always carry these if you're in a mobile workplace, a truck or something like that. Have a supply of hearing protectors available. So when you're faced with that job, you don't have to make the choice, do I go back to the shop to get some earplugs, or do I just kind of lump through it and take the exposure? Have those available. Same thing with safety glasses. Have your little supply of those things so you don't have to make that choice. Wear those things and wear them properly. Okay. So how do you wear hearing protectors? Well, muffs are pretty simple, with the exception we don't want to have anything that will interfere with that muff sealing surface. As that comes in on the side of our head, we don't want to have if there's eyeglasses or something that would cause those to raise away from our ear, it wouldn't give us as much protection there. When it comes to plugs, though, that's where people generally go wrong. They don't properly insert the earplug. Well, how do you do that? Well, you reach around the back of your head and you pull on your ear. And you ask, why do I do that? Do I just want to look silly? That opens up the ear canal. As we do that, we've rolled our plug up as small as we can get it. We insert it as far into our ear as we can, and we hold it until it expands out, filling the ear canal. If we don't do that, if we just kind of shove those in the outside, we won't get the full protection from those. What type do you use? Well, it really depends on the environment that you're in. Muffs are really nice if you've got, say, an engine room or a pump station or something like that. There's this one room that's really loud. There's compressors in there, and we go in there just for a few minutes from time to time to check on the equipment, to write down some numbers, whatever it may be. Well, if we hang a pair of muffs on the outside of that area, they're easy to pop on, go in and do our task and get out. They're not so good. Muffs aren't as good in a job where I've got to be really physically active, because they might get knocked off, or they get kind of sweaty. In some cases, muffs will provide a higher level of protection than plugs. We use plugs in areas where we need to be able to move. They're nice because they don't make you sweaty. and they're pretty easy to apply. So make sure that you have those, that we keep them clean, and that they're properly inserted. Here's if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, this is a band that goes around the back of your head. This just makes these plugs really easy to put on and take off in an area that might be, maybe your hands are dirty a lot. We don't want to be rolling up those plugs with dirt on those. All right, so as we evaluate our hearing protectors, what do we buy? Well, we need to buy a plug that or muff that has sufficient protection for the noise levels that we're seeing. So we look at the NRR. As you look on the packaging for your hearing protectors, there is an NRR rating, noise reduction rating. If you take that number, a lot of times it's going to be anywhere in the neighborhood from 20 to just over 30, and that's a decibel rating. We cut that in half, and then we subtract that from our exposure level. So say I'm exposed to 100 decibels, and I have a plug that is rated for 30. I cut that in half, take that 15 and subtract that from 100. That puts me right at my 85 decibels. That's a safe level where I'm going to be roughly protected to that level. I can work 8 hours at that level or just below. Okay. So always look at that. I am seeing a number of hearing protectors, particularly muffs, that are just cheap kind of knockoffs that don't have an NRR finding their way into the market. Buy one that has a rating. You can tell the difference when you buy those. All kinds of different configurations, sizes, shapes. So some people have larger, smaller ear canals, and to get a proper fit, there are some different options there. All right. So ask yourself, what part of my job exposes me to high levels of noise? And plan ahead for that so we have those protectors available. Is there something that we can do to minimize that exposure? And take action. Along with that, let's look at our recreational exposures. What do we do at home that could expose us to hearing loss? Like I mentioned, shooting is one of the very worst things that we can do if we do it unprotected. How do we, how do we make sure that we always have that? Just make sure that you own the hearing protection, you have that available. Listening to Iron Maiden while you're driving to Vernal could also be another exposure. I find myself with that. Maybe I'm getting older, but as I drive around, I realize I listen to the radio louder than I probably should. Let's take a look at that and say, is just listening to the radio as we're driving around something that could be affecting our hearing? All right, and really just take action. Open your mind to, hey, this could be a problem later on in my life, and I want to be able to enjoy that, hear the grandkids as I get older. So taking action now is really important because this is permanent, folks. All right, here's your next quiz. We'll see who can get this one. All right, I want you to name in the chat box the band and the lead singer. We'll see how you do here. While you're thinking about that, if you've got any questions, you can also type those in. Curly, not Curly. Mo. Jim Harper. I don't think Jim's the lead singer. I haven't got it yet. Well, I'm gonna while we're still trying to get the right answer, we'll wrap this up. Really know what you're getting into. Look at your hobbies, look at your jobs, and come up with a plan. I'm going to intentionally protect my hearing. Minimize exposure. Don't just hang around in the noisy areas. If you can avoid that, wear your hearing protectors. Turn your headphones down. And do the same thing for your kids or your grandkids. Ask them to, as they're walking by, grab an earbud and stick it in your ear and determine what level they're exposed to. I've done this with my kids and said, no, that's too loud. Here's a reasonable level, and most things they'll have an actual level that volume is measured in, and you can say don't go above 5 on this on your volume. But pay attention to those things that are happening with our kids, because that's really pretty easy to have them be injured early on in life. Report symptoms early if you have problems. Get those checked. Watch those recreational exposures. Those are probably some of the worst. Most of the jobs that we observe out there, you have intermittent high noise exposure. Most are not an 8-hour shift where you're exposed to that. So let's take action when we see those. Oh, I got to go back. Nobody got this band yet. Man, makes me feel bad. This is my band. This is Boston. The people in the first class, they said you're just too old. All right. And the lead singer was Brad Delp. Who's the guy in the middle with the big afro? His name is Sib Hashian. All right. Anybody have any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat box or the Q&A box. No? All right. Well, we need to wrap up so we can go ahead and get ready for the next webinar that we'll have at 10 o'clock. Once again, if you haven't signed up for that, send me a quick email and at jason@utahtrust.gov, and I'll send you a link to that, and we will see you. Okay, the response is Jim's older than you, and he didn't know it. Well, they haven't. That hasn't quite got out to Vernal yet, so or Naples. Excuse me. Make sure we get that right. All right, folks. I want to thank you for tuning in today. If you've got any questions, please give us a shout. We'd be happy to help out. Says he lived in a cave. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your attendance. Please go out and have a safe day.